The Assumption of Mary, a tale of faith and discovery. In the ancient lands where East meets West, where Europe and Asia converge, and where the Christian and Muslim worlds intersect, there lies a profound story. This is the story of Mary, mother of Jesus, a tale that intertwines numerous threads of belief, binding together diverse traditions and faiths. As the sands of time marched on after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the story of Mary's departure from this world became a tapestry woven from oral traditions and scripture variations. These narratives, handed down through generations, gave rise to diverse and often conflicting accounts. Some stories tell of Mary passing away peacefully in her sleep, her soul gently ascending to heaven. Others claim she never experienced death, her body rising to the heavens without tasting mortality. A few even suggest that her final moments were far from Jerusalem, possibly in India. Amid these varied accounts, one constant theme shines through: her unwavering support for the apostles and the holy men and women who faced persecution. For centuries, different Christian groups and nations clung to their unique beliefs about Mary's end. It wasn't until a recent scientific breakthrough that these centuries-old beliefs were challenged. A tomb sealed for ages was discovered, revealing what many now consider her true resting place. This discovery has prompted a profound re-examination of long-held beliefs, making Christians around the world question what is true and what is legend. In the Kidron Valley, a place steeped in religious significance, near sacred sites such as the Garden of Gethsemane and the Church of All Nations, lies a revered tomb. Many Eastern Christians venerate this tomb as Mary's final resting place. This tomb, long sealed and shrouded in mystery, held the world in suspense about its contents. When the time finally came to open it, the tomb was found utterly empty. The writings that denied Mary's ascension were thereby cast into doubt, while the Christian tradition that she was taken bodily to heaven found new affirmation. This event, known as the Assumption, is a cornerstone of Christian faith, but varies intriguingly between Catholic and Eastern Christian interpretations. Here, at the Church of the Sepulchre of St. Mary in Jerusalem, we stand to explore these diverse beliefs. Catholic doctrine holds that Mary did not die, but was assumed into heaven alive. In stark contrast, Eastern Christians believe she experienced death, was buried, and resurrected on the third day, mirroring the resurrection of her son, Jesus, before ascending to heaven. The Assumption of Mary stands as one of four pivotal Marian doctrines within the Catholic Church. Officially proclaimed by Pope Pius XII on November 1, 1950, in the document Munificentissimus Deus, this teaching is intricately linked to the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, which asserts that Mary was conceived without original sin. The doctrine of the Assumption does not explicitly state whether Mary died, but confirms that she was taken up to heaven. The Eastern Orthodox Church shares a similar belief known as the Dormition of the Mother of God, which means her peaceful sleep. Though not considered dogma, it remains a vital tradition. In his declaration, Pope Pius XII expressed hope that belief in Mary's Assumption would strengthen the faithful's belief in their own resurrection, offering assurance that just as Mary's body was taken to heaven, so too would the bodies of the believers be. There are numerous tales about where Mary's Assumption occurred, which we will delve into later. However, a notable story from around the 7th century tells of one of Jesus' apostles, often identified as Thomas, who arrived late after Mary's death. Upon reopening her tomb, he found it empty save for her garments. Some versions of this tale even recount that Mary dropped her belt from heaven as proof of her Assumption, a story depicted in numerous paintings over the centuries. The teaching about Mary's Assumption spread throughout the Christian world, and people started celebrating it as early as the 5th century. The Emperor Maurice made it an official holiday in the Eastern Roman Empire around the year 600. Some scholars think that the stories about Mary's Assumption and Dormition, or falling asleep, can be traced back to ancient Christian books that aren't even part of the Bible we use today. Some scholars who study the Bible think that a group of Jewish Christians in Jerusalem knew stories about the end of Mary's life, which were passed down through word of mouth. They believe that these stories were shared during the time of the apostles or soon after, and that they are based on real events. By looking at these oral traditions, they are trying to show that the stories about Mary's Assumption and Dormition are true, but another scholar named Shoemaker points out that these stories are very different from each other and don't come from one tradition. Instead, they come from many different sources and have gone as far as evolving over time. Even the scholars who believe in the oral traditions agree that the belief in Mary's Assumption as we know it today is the result of a long process of development, rather than the original story itself. The story of Mary's Assumption first appeared in a book called the Liber Requii Mariae, or Book of Mary's Repose, which was written in the 2nd or 3rd century. This book is not considered entirely trustworthy, and its beliefs about Mary are quite different from what most Christians believe. The old stories about Mary's Assumption are not clear and don't all agree on what happened. Some stories support the belief that Mary was taken up to heaven, while others don't. According to Stephen J. Shoemaker, there is no evidence that people believed in Mary's Assumption before the 5th century. The only exception is that Epiphanius of Salamis tried to find out how Mary's life ended in the 4th century, but he couldn't find any reliable information. Now here's where things get quite funny. It turns out the New Testament doesn't say anything about how Mary's life ended, and the early Christians didn't write any accounts of her death. Even though Epiphanius couldn't find any trustworthy tradition about how Mary's life ended, his writings show that people were already disagreeing about what happened to her. He mentioned 3 different beliefs. Some people thought Mary died a peaceful death, others thought she died as a martyr, and others believed she didn't die at all. Epiphanius also wrote that Mary was like Elijah, who was taken up to heaven without dying. Mary was assumed into heaven at the end of her earthly life. She was taken up body and soul into heaven. This idea was repeated in later writings that aren't considered entirely trustworthy, like Diobedo's Domini and De Transitu Virginis, which were probably written in the 5th century. Other writers like Dionysius the Areopagite and Gregory of Tours also shared similar stories. These writings helped spread the belief in Mary's Assumption, which was considered unofficial until the 6th century. But by the 8th century, the belief had become widely accepted, and John of Damascus wrote that Mary died in the presence of the apostles, but when they got to her tomb, they were in for a shock. Her tomb was found empty when they opened it, leading them to believe her body was taken up to heaven. The celebration of Mary's Dormition, which was brought from the Eastern Church, arrived in the Western Church in the 7th century. Over time, the name of the celebration changed to the Assumption in some religious calendars in the 9th century. In the same century, Pope Leo IV made the feast day more important by adding a vigil and an octave, which are special religious ceremonies. Later, Pope Nicholas I placed the Assumption on the same level as Christmas and Easter, which are 2 of the most important holidays in the Christian calendar. Then, in the 12th century, a German nun named Elizabeth of Schapnau had visions of Mary and Jesus that greatly influenced the Western Church's belief in Mary's Assumption. Later, Pope Benedict XIV declared that believing in Mary's Assumption was a reasonable opinion and that not believing in it would be disrespectful to God. On May 1, 1950, a man named Gilles Borges, who claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary, told Pope Pius XX a message that he said Mary wanted him to share with the Pope. The message was about the Assumption of Mary, which is the belief that Mary was taken up to heaven. Pope Pius XX had been praying for a sign to confirm that this belief was true, and he took Gilles' message as that sign. 6 months later, on November 1, 1950, the Pope officially declared the Assumption of Mary as a dogma, which is basically a belief that is considered absolutely true by the Catholic Church. What makes the whole thing more complicated is that not all Catholics believe the same thing about Mary's Assumption. Keep watching because your belief might be one of them. More beliefs. of Mary's ascension into heaven. Some Catholics believe that Mary died before she was taken up to heaven, but they also believe that she was brought back to life by a miracle before being assumed. This belief is called the moralistic interpretation. There are also some Catholics who believe that Mary was taken up to heaven without dying first, which is called the immortalistic interpretation. Others believe that she died and was then taken up to heaven, which is called the mortalistic interpretation. The last two beliefs are allowed in the Catholic Church, and Eastern Catholics celebrate the feast day as the Dormition. But many signs in Catholic traditions, such as prayers, stories, and art, suggest that the mortalistic interpretation is more widely accepted. Remember that Saint Pope John Paul II publicly expressed the mortalistic belief. The Catholic Church celebrates the Feast of the Assumption on August 15th, while the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches celebrate the Dormition of the Mother of God on the same date. Before the feast, Eastern Christians fast for 14 days to honor Mary's life and death. They believe that Mary died a natural death, but that her soul was taken up by Christ immediately. They also believe that her body was resurrected after her death and taken up into heaven, where she awaits the general resurrection of all believers. Protestant beliefs about Mary's Assumption vary, with some groups closer to Catholicism believing in a bodily assumption, while most Protestants do not. In the Anglican tradition, there is also a range of beliefs, with some accepting the Assumption, others rejecting it, and some considering it a matter of indifference. Although the doctrine was largely absent from Anglican worship for many years, it experienced a resurgence in the 20th century among Anglo-Catholic groups who celebrated it under different names. Today, different Anglican churches celebrate a feast day on August 15th, but with different names and focuses. The Church of England honors the Blessed Virgin Mary without specifying the Assumption, while the Scottish Episcopal Church simply calls it Mary the Virgin. In the United States, the Episcopal Church celebrates Saint Mary the Virgin, Mother of our Lord Jesus Christ, while other provinces like the Anglican Church of Canada mark the day as the falling asleep of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is another way of referring to the Dormition. For hundreds of years, the tomb of Jesus Christ in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem has been covered with a layer of marble. But in October 2016, a team of scientists finally got to see what was underneath. They were working on a project to fix up the tomb in the church, and they were excited to learn more about this important place. When the scientists removed the marble, they found a lot of extra material underneath. They were surprised by how much was there. Now they get to study the original rock that Jesus' body was laid on, according to Christian belief. That's not all. According to the Christian faith, Jesus Christ was killed by the Romans and then placed in a special spot in a cave. This spot was like a shelf carved out of the rock of the cave. This event happened either in the year 30 or 33. Christians believe that Jesus came back to life after he died, and when some women went to visit his body a few days later, they found that it was gone. The shelf where Jesus was placed is now inside a small building called the Oedicule, which is like a little house. This building was rebuilt between 1808 and 1810 after it was damaged in a fire. Since 2017, a team of scientists from Greece has been working to fix up the Oedicule and the tomb inside it. They are being led by a woman named Professor Antonia Miropoulou, who is in charge of the project. Scientists are very excited because they finally get to see and study a very important place that has been hidden under a thick layer of marble for so long. By studying the original rock of the tomb, scientists can learn more about what the tomb looked like a long time ago and how it has changed over time. They can also learn about how people have been honoring and respecting this place for a very long time. The scientists are using special tools and techniques to study the tomb and take detailed pictures and notes. This will allow people from all over the world to see and learn about the tomb as if they were actually there. The leader of the project, Professor Antonia Miropoulou, says that they are at a very important moment in their work, and that the special ways they are used to study the tomb will help everyone learn more about this unique and special place. the church closed early. So many people who were visiting from other places were standing outside, confused, because they couldn't get in. Inside the church, there were lots of different people, like workers wearing yellow hats, monks wearing brown robes, priests wearing black hats, and others wearing special hoods. They were all gathered around the special tomb called the Edicule, trying to get a look inside. The tomb is usually dimly lit by candles, but this time it was brightly lit, showing off details that are usually hard to see. The special tomb is surrounded by a fancy building that was built in the 1800s. Right now, that building is covered in beams and safety tape. Inside the tomb, the special slab of marble that covers the important bench had been pulled away from the wall. This slab is about as big as a door and is made of white marble with a smooth finish. Underneath the marble slab, there was a stone surface that was a gray-beige color. When someone asked what it was, the person in charge of taking care of the tomb said they weren't sure yet, but it was time to use special tools to figure it out. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is also called the Church of the Resurrection, is a very important place for many different groups of Christians. 6 groups take care of the church, and 3 of them, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Armenian Orthodox Church, are in charge of making big decisions. The other 3 groups, the Coptic, Ethiopian Orthodox, and Syriac communities, also have a say in what happens at the church. The church has some special areas that all the groups use together. And one of those areas is the tomb where Jesus is said to have been buried. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre and another church called Mary's Tomb, which was built around the same time in the 4th century AD, are visited by many people every year. The special building that houses Mary's tomb has been destroyed and rebuilt many times over the years. The building that stands today was constructed by a group of Franciscan friars in the 14th century. The Greek Orthodox Church is the main caretaker of the building, but they share some responsibilities with other Christian groups. To reach Mary's tomb, visitors must go down a long staircase that is over 1,000 years old. On the way down, they pass by 2 smaller chapels, one dedicated to Mary's husband Joseph and another dedicated to her parents. When they reach the tomb, they have to duck down to enter the small space. Inside, they are surrounded by beautiful religious art and icons from the Middle Ages. The atmosphere is peaceful and reverent as pilgrims come to pray and light candles. Before scientists finally found Mary's resting place, there were several spots believed to be where she was buried, and you won't believe how some traditions have justified their claims. Some places where people believe the Virgin Mary was buried, there are different beliefs about the tomb of the Virgin Mary. The Turkmen Karaites believe that Mary's tomb is in a town called Mari in Turkmenistan, which used to be named Mari. This belief comes from a tradition called Nestorian. Another belief comes from Christians in a place called Nineveh in northern Iraq. They think Mary's tomb is near a city called Erbil, and they link it to a mosque in a city called Mosul. The Ahmadiyya movement thinks Mary's tomb is in a town called Murree in Pakistan. They believe her tomb is now in a special place called Mimari Da Ashton. But if these places claim she died in their tombs, how did she get there? There are many stories and legends about the Virgin Mary's travels after Jesus' death. Remember the one involving Thomas we talked about that was circulating sometime around the 7th century? Well, the story didn't end there. It claimed Mary went to India with Thomas the Apostle, where she passed away in a town called Mari, which is now part of Turkmenistan. According to this story, Thomas was the only apostle who saw Mary's body rise to heaven, while the others were taken to Jerusalem to see her die. The story says Thomas was left in India until after Mary's first burial, when he was suddenly taken to her tomb and saw her body rise to heaven, leaving behind only her belt. The other apostles didn't believe Thomas when he told them what he saw, but later they found Mary's tomb empty, except for her belt. This story was often told with drawings and paintings during the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. There's another legend that says Mary traveled to the Middle East and died in a town called Mari, which, remember, is in modern-day Turkmenistan. There's another story about the Virgin Mary's life that says she went to a place called Ephesus towards the end of her life, around 3745 AD. This story says she was accompanied by Saint John, who was like a son to her. Some historians from the Renaissance period wrote about this trip. And local Christians believed that a small house near Ephesus was Mary's home. Saint John wrote in his gospel that Jesus, before he died on the cross, asked John to take care of his mother, and from that moment on, John looked after her. The book of Acts tells us that after Jesus' death, his followers faced persecution in Jerusalem. Saint Stephen was stoned to death in 37 AD and Saint James was beheaded in 42 AD. The apostles then decided to spread out across the world to preach the gospel, and Saint John was given the responsibility of preaching in Asia Minor, which is now modern-day Turkey. He likely took Mary with him to escape the persecution in Jerusalem. Two historical pieces of evidence support this story. First, the tomb of St. John is in Ephesus, and second, the first church dedicated to the Virgin Mary was built there. So up and down the ages the churches had to deal with heresies, and in 428 AD the Bishop of Constantinople was Nestorius. In the early days of the church, buildings were only dedicated to people who had lived or died in that place, so this shows that Mary was indeed in Ephesus. The Ecumenical Council of 431, a very important meeting of church leaders, was held in this basilica in Ephesus to define the dogma of Mary's divine motherhood. The Council Fathers wrote about Nestorius, mentioning that he arrived in Ephesus, where St. John and the Holy Virgin Mary, Mother of God, were. The villagers of Kirkinji, who are descendants of the early Christians of Ephesus, have also passed down an oral tradition through generations that Mary died in that place, which they call Panaya Kapulu. They keep this tradition alive with an annual pilgrimage on August 15th. In the 19th century, a book called The Life of the Blessed Virgin was published in Germany. The book was special because it was based on the visions of a nun named Anna Katharina Emmerich, who had never left Germany but had seen many things in her dreams. In her visions, she described the hills of Ephesus and the house where the Virgin Mary spent her last days. People were amazed by her descriptions, and they wanted to see if they were true. So two groups of scientists went to Ephesus to search for the place Anna Katharina had described, and they found it. The house was exactly as she had said, and it was built on foundations that were from the 1st and 4th centuries. Some parts of the building were from the 7th century, and it had been restored one last time in 1951. Even the Pope, Paul VI, visited the site in 1967 and said that the legend was true. Now, every year on August 15th, Christians and Muslims come together to celebrate a special service in honor of Mary's Assumption into heaven. Islam too has an explanation for how the Virgin Mary got to where she breathed her last. In Islamic belief, the Prophet Muhammad had a special journey one night. He was taken from Mecca to Jerusalem and then all the way to heaven, all in one night. He wasn't alone, though. The angel Gabriel was with him. Along the way, they saw many important prophets, like Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. They were all gathered around the tomb of Mary, the mother of Jesus. This tomb is said to be in Jerusalem, near a special place called the Dome of the Rock. Some stories even say that Muhammad saw a bright light shining over her tomb. After visiting Mary's tomb, Muhammad continued his journey to heaven. When he got there, he saw Mary again, sitting in a special place next to God's throne. That wasn't all he saw. She was surrounded by angels. In Islam, Mary is considered a truly amazing woman, one of the best in history. God chose her because she was so pure and devoted to him. She's often mentioned alongside the prophets and other holy people. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, talks about Mary many times, showing how important she is to Muslims. There are also many stories and traditions called hadiths that tell us more about Muhammad's special journey to heaven and his meeting with Mary. To honor the Assumption of Mary in religious groups and churches that believe that was how she died, Orthodox Christians prepare for the special day of the Assumption of Mary by fasting for 14 days. This means they don't eat certain foods and also abstain from sexual relations. During this time, they follow strict rules on weekdays, only eating certain foods and not drinking wine or oil. On weekends, they are allowed to have wine, oil, and fish on the special day of the Transfiguration, which is August 6th. This fasting is a way to show respect and devotion to Mary, the mother of Jesus. The Assumption of Mary is a very important day for many Christians, including Catholics, Orthodox, Lutherans, and Anglicans. It's seen as Mary's heavenly birthday, the day she was taken up into heaven. As we mentioned earlier in the video, many countries around the world celebrate Assumption Day on August 15th as a special public holiday. Some of these countries are Andorra, Austria, Belgium, Burundi, Cameroon, and many others in Europe, Africa, and South America. In these countries, people often go to church and spend time with family and friends on this day. In total, there are over 30 countries that celebrate Assumption Day as a public holiday. Some of these countries include France, Greece, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, and many others. In some countries like Hungary, Assumption Day was celebrated as a public holiday in the past, but is no longer observed. In other countries like Montenegro, only certain communities like Albanian Catholics celebrate Assumption Day. In some parts of Germany, like Bavaria and Saarland and Switzerland, like 14 out of 26 cantons, Assumption Day is a public holiday. In Guatemala, it's a special day in the capital city and the town of Santa Maria Nabaje, where Mary is considered the patron saint. In some countries like Costa Rica and parts of Belgium, Assumption Day is celebrated together with Mother's Day. Even in countries where it's not a public holiday, Assumption Day is still a big deal for many Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox Christians. For example, in the Czech Republic, Ireland, Mexico, the Philippines, and Russia, people still celebrate this day with religious services and other traditions. In Bulgaria, the Feast of the Assumption is the most important celebration of the Holy Virgin in the Eastern Orthodox Church. People go to church and offer special prayers and gifts. In the city of Varna, they even have a procession with a holy icon concerts. Many places around the world have grand celebrations and significant church events to honor Assumption Day. In Canada, this day holds a special significance for the Acadian people, who regard Mary as their patron saint. On this day, some businesses, especially in areas where French is widely spoken, such as parts of New Brunswick, close their doors in observance. Mary is also the patron saint of Malta, where her feast day on August 15th is celebrated as a public holiday. In Malta, Assumption Day is marked with elaborate church services, drawing large congregations who come together in reverence and celebration. Similarly, in a small town in Texas called Praha, Assumption Day is celebrated with a large festival that attracts many visitors from near and far. This festival is a vibrant expression of faith and community spirit, reflecting the deep-rooted traditions surrounding the Assumption. Despite the importance of Assumption Day to many Christians, not all churches officially use the term Assumption Day. For instance, some Anglican and Lutheran churches observe the feast without specifically referring to it as Assumption Day. This variation in naming underscores the diverse ways in which Christian communities honor Mary's Assumption. In some Eastern Orthodox churches that follow the Julian calendar, Assumption Day is celebrated on August 28th instead of August 15th. This difference in dates highlights the rich tapestry of traditions within Christianity, each with its unique way of venerating Mary. As we ponder these diverse claims about Mary's death and resting place, I invite you to reflect on which narrative resonates most with you. Do you celebrate the Assumption of the Virgin Mary? How do these stories and traditions impact your faith and practice? We would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this enlightening journey of discovery and reflection. If you found this exploration meaningful, I encourage you to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and share this message with others. By doing so, You help spread these timeless stories and keep the conversation alive. Let's continue to delve into the depths of these profound narratives together. Comment below with your thoughts and questions, and let's keep the dialogue going. Through our shared exploration, we can uncover more profound truths and find ways to apply them to our lives in meaningful ways. God bless you, and thank you for being a part of this journey.